Perhaps I should tell you about them," my father went on, a little doubtfully. "You are their niece, after all. Mind you, there are so many of them. I hope I don't get mixed up." I waited for him to begin. I was dying to hear about my aunts, and yet my father seemed to forget about them almost as soon as he had mentioned them. I knew, though, that if I asked him to tell me about them at once, he would only become quiet and start to read his newspaper. So I said nothing then and waited until the next day. After he had come back from work with another rejected invention, I made him a cup of tea and a buttered scone. I knew that there was nothing he liked more than that. "About those aunts," I began. He glanced at me, but his eyes were fixed on the scone. "Is that for me?" he asked eagerly. "Yes," I said, "if—" My father frowned. "If what?" he asked. "If you tell me about my aunts." My father stared at me, and then looked again at the thickly buttered scone. "What would you like to know about them?" he asked. "There isn't an awful lot to hear, you know." "I want to hear everything," I said quickly. "Everything you can remember." My father sighed. "May I have the scone first?" he asked. And so my father told me about my aunts, although he did not tell me the whole story in one sitting. I had to coax it out of him, and it was only after several days, and a whole plate of buttered scones, that I heard all that he had to say about my newly discovered aunts. My father had been the only boy in the family. They lived on a small farm in those days, and there was not much money. It would have been all right if there had been just 1 or 2 children, but there were 6 children altogether, and that meant there were 8 mouths to feed. With so many children, too, there was never enough money to buy the clothes that were needed. My father told me that he had to wear girls' shoes, handed down from his sisters. So while other boys wore proper boys' shoes, he wore red shoes with bows on them, right up until he reached the age of 8. This embarrassed him horribly. Whenever anybody came to the farm, he would quickly take his shoes off and walk around barefoot. The children did much of the work on the farm. They did have a tractor once. My father thought it must have been one of the first tractors ever made, but it was so old that eventually it couldn't be patched up anymore. At harvest time, they used to cut the crops themselves, using scythes and sickles. And if things needed to be dragged around, they also had to do that themselves. As a result of this, he explained, most of my aunts grew up very, very strong. Slowly, as I wrested the story out of him in dribs and drabs, I was able to build up a picture of my marvellous aunts. With a growing sense of excitement, I realised that every one of them had something rather special about her. Even to have one aunt like that would have been a treat, but to have 5, well, that was very good luck indeed. He told me first about Veronica. She was the oldest and also the strongest. She could lift 4 bales of hay at once, he said, without feeling the strain. If the plough got stuck in a ditch, then they'd call Veronica. She'd walk around it for a moment or 2, and then, with a quick heave, she'd have it out of the ditch and back in its place. My father told me that they were all proud of her strength. At the agricultural show each year, there was a strong man competition. All the farmhands who thought they were stronger than everybody else thought this was the highlight of the show, and they would puff and go red in the face, picking up all sorts of heavy objects. My father wanted Veronica to enter, but there was one problem. They said that the competition was for strong men, not strong women, so girls couldn't enter. "Anyway," said the man who was in charge, "who ever heard of a strong girl?" This sort of thing seemed very unfair to my father, and so he made a plan with Veronica. They got a hold of some boys' clothes and dressed her up in them. Then they tucked her hair up under a cap, the sort that all the farmhands wore, and there she was, a boy. That year the strong men had to pick up pigs. There was an awfully fat pig in a pen called Norman, and the contestants had to try to pick him up. So far, nobody had succeeded in lifting Norman. One man got 2 of Norman's feet off the ground, but then Norman gave him a nip on the ankle and he dropped him. When Veronica went forward, all the spectators had laughed. "You're just a boy," one farmer called out. "Come back in 10 years' time." Veronica paid no attention to all this. She paid her entrance fee and stepped into the pig pen. Then she went up to Norman and put her arms around his fat body. He really was the most enormous pig, and he must have weighed hundreds of pounds. She bent her knees, and with a sudden heave, up went Norman into the air. The pig was so surprised that he forgot to try to nip her. One moment he was enjoying a good guzzle of turnip scrapings, and the next he was in the air, his feet pointing up toward the sky. He let out an awful squealing noise at first, and then went absolutely silent. All the breath had been squeezed out of him by Veronica's mighty grip. Veronica held Norman there for at least a minute. Then she gently lowered him back onto his feet. Norman gave a gasp, followed by a grunt, and finally he lurched away to a corner. He stood there, glaring at Veronica, every rasher of his bacon quivering in fear. Veronica was very pleased. She stepped forward to receive her prize and gave Norman a friendly pat immediately afterward. He just squealed with fright, though, and my father said that he thought Norman would remember that day for the rest of his life. Family History. I liked the sound of Aunt Veronica. I had always hated people saying that girls are weaker than boys, and the thought of Aunt Veronica proving that this was nonsense pleased me immensely. But what about the others? "Get me another scone," said my father, "and then I'll tell you something about your other aunts." I buttered the largest scone I could find and set it in front of him. This seemed to put him in a very good mood, and over the next few minutes he told me all about Majolica. She was his bossy sister. She used to tell all the others what to do from the moment she got up in the morning until the time she went to bed. "She was always shouting, 'Do this, do that, no, not that way,'" said my father, "and so on. She had ideas about everything. If she thought somebody walked the wrong way, she'd say something about it. If she didn't like the way somebody brushed her hair, she'd tell her to change it. There was nothing she wasn't prepared to boss people over." "Can you just imagine how bossy she was?" asked my father. "Well, I played a trick on her once, and although it didn't stop her bossing people around, it certainly kept her quiet for a day or so. It was a very good trick, and I don't have time to tell you about it now, but I will later on." My father laughed at the memory of the mysterious trick. So far, though, he had only spoken about Veronica and Majolica, and I was eager to hear all about the others too. "There were 3 others," he went on, counting the aunts on his fingers. "Veronica was the oldest. Then after her came the twins, Japonica and Thessalonika. I can't quite remember whether Harmonica was older than Majolica, although I do know that Japonica arrived 2 minutes before Thessalonika." Harmonica was the musical one, which suited her name, of course. They had no musical instruments then, but Harmonica had the most enchanting voice anybody could imagine. She sounded like a nightingale.